From an atheist director playing God to Charlie Chaplin refusing to build an ark, John Huston's biblical epic hides scandalous affairs, fired composers, and animal tracks that cost millions. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Bible. In the beginning. Fact 1. Atheist playing God. In one of Hollywood's most ironic casting decisions, John Huston, a man who didn't believe in God, ended up playing not just one but 3 divine roles in the Bible. In the beginning. The legendary director took on the voice of God himself, narrated the entire film as the omniscient storyteller, and appeared on screen as the beloved character of Noah, creating what might be the ultimate case of an actor working against type. Huston's atheism was well known in Hollywood circles, making his involvement in this deeply religious project all the more surprising. When producer Dino De Laurentiis approached him to direct this ambitious biblical epic in 1966, Huston didn't let his personal beliefs stand in the way of what he saw as a compelling storytelling opportunity. He treated the biblical material with the same respect and craftsmanship he brought to any other source material, viewing the stories as powerful human dramas rather than religious doctrine. The decision to cast himself as Noah came about almost by accident. Huston had originally wanted Charlie Chaplin for the role, but the comedy legend declined because he preferred to direct his own films. After considering Alec Guinness, who was unavailable, Huston decided to step in front of the camera himself. His performance as the ark-building patriarch became one of the film's most praised elements, with critics noting his natural warmth and humor in the role. What makes this situation even more fascinating is that Huston wasn't alone in his lack of religious faith among the cast. Both Ava Gardner, who played Sarah, and George C. Scott, who portrayed Abraham, were also atheists in real life, creating an unusual situation where non-believers were bringing some of the Bible's most important figures to life on the big screen. Fact 2. Chaplin's ark rejection. Charlie Chaplin almost became Noah in what would have been one of cinema's most unexpected casting choices, but the comedy legend's famous need for creative control killed the deal before it could float. When John Huston was putting together his dream cast for the Bible, in the beginning in the mid-1960s, he had a bold vision of casting the little tramp himself as the ark-building patriarch, imagining how Chaplin's natural warmth and comedic timing could bring humanity to the biblical figure. Huston's choice wasn't as strange as it might seem at first glance. By this time, Chaplin had already proven his dramatic abilities in films like Limelight and The Great Dictator, showing he could handle serious material while still bringing his unique charm to the screen. The director saw Noah's story, with its elements of divine comedy and the challenge of managing thousands of animals, as perfect for Chaplin's particular blend of humor and heart. However, Chaplin had spent decades as Hollywood's ultimate auteur, writing, directing, producing, and starring in his own films with complete creative control. The idea of appearing in someone else's movie, even for a respected director like Huston, simply didn't appeal to him. Chaplin politely declined the offer, preferring to maintain his independence rather than work under another director's vision, no matter how prestigious the project might be. This rejection forced Huston to completely reimagine the role, eventually leading him to consider other major actors like Alec Guinness, before ultimately deciding to play Noah himself. The final irony is that Chaplin's refusal to give up creative control meant that audiences missed seeing one of cinema's greatest performers tackle one of the Bible's most beloved characters, while an atheist director ended up playing the man chosen by God to save all living creatures from the flood. Fact 3. Animal tracks disaster. Robert Bresson, one of France's most respected art house directors, managed to turn what should have been the most spectacular scene in the Bible into the most expensive collection of animal footprints in cinema history. Producer Dino De Laurentiis originally hired Bresson in 1964 to bring his unique artistic vision to this biblical epic, believing that the acclaimed filmmaker behind Pickpocket and A Man Escaped could create something truly special with the flood sequence. De Laurentiis spared no expense to make Bresson's vision possible, granting him access to every single animal in Rome's city zoo for the filming of Noah's Ark and the Great Deluge. This was an enormous logistical undertaking that required coordinating with zookeepers, animal handlers, and transportation crews to move lions, elephants, giraffes, and countless other creatures to the filming location. The producer expected to see dramatic footage of animals boarding the ark, or perhaps sweeping shots of creatures fleeing the rising waters. Instead, when the daily rushes came back from the lab, the stunned producers discovered that Bresson had filmed nothing but the tracks and footprints that the animals had left behind in the sand on a beach. No animals appeared on camera, no dramatic flood sequences, no ark loading scenes, just the quiet aftermath of where these creatures had walked across the sandy surface. The minimalist approach that made Bresson famous in art cinema was completely at odds with what De Laurentiis needed for a big-budget biblical spectacular. The producers were absolutely furious at what they saw as a colossal waste of time, money, and resources. They immediately fired Bresson from the project and brought in John Huston to take over, which delayed the entire production by an additional 6 months. This costly mistake became one of the most expensive artistic misunderstandings in film history, proving that even the most talented directors aren't necessarily right for every type of project. Fact 4. Real-life biblical drama. Life imitated art in the most extraordinary way when director John Huston began an affair with Zoe Salas, the actress playing Hagar in the film, and she became pregnant with his child, creating an almost perfect mirror of the biblical story they were filming. In the book of Genesis, Hagar serves as Sarah's handmaiden and bears Abraham a son named Ishmael, which becomes a source of tension and drama within Abraham's household. During the production of the Bible in 1966, Huston found himself living out a remarkably similar situation. Zoe Salas was an Anglo-Persian actress who had originally been known as Zoe Ishmael, but Huston had insisted she change her name because it was too similar to Ishmael, the name of her character's son in the biblical story. The irony became even deeper when their real-life relationship developed during filming, as Huston was married at the time, making Salas somewhat like a modern-day equivalent of the biblical Hagar, who bore a child to a married man. Their affair resulted in the birth of Danny Huston, who would grow up to become a successful actor and director in his own right, appearing in films like The Constant Gardener and X-Men Origins. Wolverine. The parallel between the biblical narrative and the real events happening behind the cameras was so striking that it seemed almost scripted, with the director essentially playing out the role of Abraham while his leading lady took on the real-life role of Hagar. This wasn't the only romantic drama unfolding during the production, as the set became a hotbed of passionate relationships that often mirrored the intense emotions of the biblical stories being told. The fact that Huston's personal life so closely echoed the ancient tale he was bringing to the screen added an unexpected layer of authenticity to a film that was already blurring the lines between fiction and reality in fascinating ways. Fact 5. Ennio Morricone's lost score. Ennio Morricone, who would later become one of cinema's most celebrated composers for his work on spaghetti westerns and countless other films, almost provided the musical backdrop for the Bible, but lost the job due to a frustrating contract dispute that cost him what could have been his first major Hollywood breakthrough. Producer Dino De Laurentiis initially hired Morricone to compose the score for this ambitious biblical epic, and the young Italian composer threw himself into the project with enthusiasm, creating about 15 minutes of test music that perfectly captured the grandeur and spirituality the film required. Director John Huston was so impressed with Morricone's work that he gave it his full approval, praising the composer's ability to blend traditional religious themes with modern orchestral arrangements. The music seemed destined to become part of one of 1966's most important films, potentially launching Morricone into the upper ranks of film composers years before his famous collaborations with Sergio Leone would make him a household name among movie fans. However, the deal fell apart when a contract dispute erupted between De Laurentiis and RCA Records, which was Morricone's publisher at the time. The legal and financial disagreements became so complicated that De Laurentiis decided it would be easier to simply let Morricone go rather than work through the publishing issues. This left the composer with 15 minutes of beautiful, unused music and no credit on what would become the year's highest-grossing film. Morricone didn't let his work go to waste, though, as he cleverly reworked his unused biblical themes into 3 of his later film scores. The Return of Ringo in 1965, Garden of Delights in 1967, and The Secret of the Sahara in 1988. Meanwhile, De Laurentiis replaced him with Japanese composer Toshiro Mayuzumi, who ended up receiving an Academy Award nomination for the score that might have belonged to Morricone. Fact 6. First Japanese Oscar nomination. Toshiro Mayuzumi made Academy Award history when he became the first Japanese-born composer ever nominated for a Best Original Score Oscar, achieving this milestone through his work on the Bible, after being brought in as a last-minute replacement for Ennio Morricone. When John Huston found himself without a composer due to the contract dispute that had forced out Morricone, he turned to Mayuzumi, whom he called a modern Beethoven. Recognizing the Japanese composer's unique ability to blend Eastern and Western musical traditions. Fact 6. First Japanese Oscar nomination. Toshiro Mayuzumi made Academy Award history when he became the first Japanese-born composer ever nominated for a Best Original Score Oscar, achieving this milestone through his work on the Bible, after being brought in as a last-minute replacement for Ennio Morricone. When John Huston found himself without a composer due to the contract dispute that had forced out Morricone, he turned to Mayuzumi, whom he called a modern Beethoven. Recognizing the Japanese composer's unique ability to blend Eastern and Western musical traditions in ways that could serve the epic scope of this biblical story. Mayuzumi was already well established in Japan as both a classical composer and a pioneer in electronic music, having studied at the Paris Conservatory and worked with some of the most advanced musical techniques of his time. His background made him an ideal choice for a film that needed to sound both ancient and timeless, as he could draw from traditional Japanese musical concepts while creating orchestral arrangements that would appeal to international audiences in 1967. The composer's nomination came at a time when the Academy Awards rarely recognized talent from outside the established Hollywood system, making his achievement all the more significant for opening doors for future international artists. His score successfully captured the grandeur and spiritual weight that the film required, using sweeping orchestral themes and innovative musical textures that helped elevate the biblical stories to cinematic heights. Although Mayuzumi didn't win the Oscar that year, his nomination established an important precedent and remained unique for decades afterward. It wasn't until 1987, 20 years later, that another Japanese-born composer would receive the same honor, when Ryuichi Sakamoto was nominated for his work on The Last Emperor. Mayuzumi's groundbreaking achievement through the Bible demonstrated that musical excellence could transcend cultural boundaries, and that Hollywood was beginning to recognize the value of diverse artistic perspectives in creating truly universal stories. Fact 7. Explosive hotel door. Ava Gardner and George C. Scott turned their on-screen roles as the biblical couples Sarah and Abraham into a passionate real-life romance that became legendary for its intensity and explosive moments, including one unforgettable night when Scott literally kicked down the door to Gardner's hotel suite. The two veteran actors, both known for their fiery personalities and complicated personal lives, found themselves drawn to each other during the long months of filming in Italy, creating a relationship that was as dramatic off-screen as anything happening in front of the cameras. Gardner, who was already a Hollywood legend by 1966, had been through highly publicized marriages to Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and Frank Sinatra, giving her a reputation as one of the most captivating and unpredictable women in show business. Scott, meanwhile, was known for his powerful performances and equally powerful temper, having already established himself as one of the most intense actors of his generation with roles in films like The Hustler and Dr. Strangelove. Their affair was brief but incredibly stormy, marked by passionate arguments and equally passionate reconciliations that kept the entire cast and crew on edge throughout the production. The most dramatic incident occurred when Scott, after a night of heavy drinking, became enraged over something Gardner had said or done and marched to her hotel suite in Rome. When she refused to open the door, he simply kicked it down in a drunken fury, creating a scene that became part of Hollywood folklore. Despite the explosive nature of their relationship, both actors managed to maintain their professionalism on set, delivering powerful performances that helped anchor the film's emotional core. Gardner later spoke fondly of her time making The Bible, calling it the only film where she actually enjoyed the work, though she was presumably referring to the acting rather than the off-screen drama. Fact 8. Swedish Eve selection? The casting of Eve became an international debate when producer Dino De Laurentiis decided to let newspaper readers around the world determine what the first woman should look like, leading to a poll that revealed some surprising assumptions about the mother of all humanity. Originally, De Laurentiis had planned to cast what one Time magazine article described as a languorous Italian brunette for the role of Eve, which would have made sense given that this was an American-Italian co-production and Italian actresses were readily available for the part. However, De Laurentiis became curious about public opinion on this crucial casting decision and decided to conduct an unprecedented international newspaper poll, asking readers from various countries whether they pictured Eve as blonde or dark-haired. The results were both fascinating and revealing about the cultural biases of the 1960s, as readers overwhelmingly voted for a blonde Eve, with many respondents explaining that they simply could not imagine the mother of mankind coming from anywhere east of Sweden. This surprising outcome completely changed De Laurentiis's casting plans and led him to search for a Scandinavian actress instead of the Italian performer he had originally envisioned. The search eventually brought him to Ulla Bergrid, a 21-year-old anthropology student from Gothenburg, Sweden, who was discovered by a talent scout while visiting a museum in her hometown. Bergrid had no acting experience whatsoever, but her natural beauty and innocent appearance perfectly matched what the international poll had determined Eve should look like. The irony of this casting decision was particularly striking given that the Garden of Eden is traditionally believed to have been located somewhere in the Middle East, making a blonde, blue-eyed Swedish actress an unlikely choice from a geographical standpoint. Nevertheless, Bergrid's performance was well received, and her casting became a perfect example of how public opinion and cultural expectations can influence even the most fundamental creative decisions in filmmaking. Fact 9. Name change for irony. Anglo-Persian actress Zoe Ishmael found herself forced to abandon her birth name when director John Huston decided it was too confusingly similar to Ishmael, the name of the son her character Hagar would bear in the biblical story. This seemingly simple name change created one of the most ironic twists in casting history, as the actress who gave up the name Ishmael would later give birth to the director's real son, essentially living out the very biblical story that had prompted the name change in the first place. Huston was concerned that having an actress named Ishmael playing a character whose son would be named Ishmael would create unnecessary confusion for audiences and might even seem like a publicity stunt or some kind of deliberate joke. He insisted that she adopt a different professional name before filming began, leading to her choice of Zoe Salas, which became the name she would use for the rest of her career in entertainment and her personal life. The irony deepened when Huston and Salas began their affair during the production, mirroring the biblical relationship between Abraham and Hagar that they were portraying on screen. In the book of Genesis, Hagar serves as Sarah's handmaiden and bears Abraham a son named Ishmael after Sarah proves unable to conceive, creating tension within the household. Similarly, Salas became pregnant with Huston's child during filming, giving birth to Danny Huston, who would grow up to become a successful actor and director. The name change that was meant to avoid confusion about biblical characters ended up being eerily prophetic, as the actress who could no longer use a name similar to Ishmael found herself in the exact same situation as the biblical character she was playing. This strange coincidence became one of the most talked about aspects of the film's production, demonstrating how life sometimes imitates art in the most unexpected ways. Fact 10. Triple role madness. Peter O'Toole took on one of the most challenging acting assignments in the Bible by playing all three heavenly messengers who visit Abraham and Sarah, creating a logistical nightmare that required constant costume changes and careful camera work to maintain the illusion that audiences were seeing three different supernatural beings. In the biblical story from Genesis, three angels appear to Abraham to announce that his elderly wife Sarah will finally bear a child, and later, these same divine messengers travel to the sinful cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to carry out God's judgment. Rather than cast three separate actors for these crucial roles, John Huston made the bold decision to have O'Toole portray all three angels, believing that the acclaimed actor's commanding presence and distinctive voice would give the heavenly visitors the otherworldly authority they needed. This choice meant that O'Toole had to master 3 distinct characterizations while wearing different costumes and makeup for each angel, creating the impression that they were separate entities even though they were all the same person. The technical challenges of filming these scenes were enormous, as the makeup and costume departments had to work around the clock to transform O'Toole between takes, often requiring hours of preparation for each new angelic appearance. The cinematographer also had to carefully plan shots to avoid showing the 3 angels together in the same frame, since that would have made the casting trick impossible to maintain. O'Toole's performance as the 3 angels became one of the film's most memorable elements, with critics praising his ability to create distinct personalities for each heavenly messenger, while maintaining the sense that they were all part of the same divine mission. His portrayal was so convincing that many viewers didn't realize until the credits rolled that they had been watching the same actor in 3 different roles throughout the Abraham sequence. Fact 11. Million dollar sets lost money. The Bible became one of Hollywood's most expensive financial disasters, despite its massive box office success, with producer Dino De Laurentiis spending an astronomical $3 million just to build 5 different sets representing Noah's Ark, which would be equivalent to about $26 million in today's money. These elaborate interior sets were among the largest ever constructed at the time, designed to accommodate not only the principal actors, but also hundreds of live animals and thousands of extras representing all the creatures saved from the Great Flood. The Ark sets were engineering marvels that featured multiple levels, intricate wooden construction, and sophisticated systems for managing the countless animals that would appear in the flood sequence. De Laurentiis spared no expense in making these sets as authentic and spectacular as possible, believing that the biblical story deserved the most lavish treatment that money could buy. The construction took months to complete and required teams of skilled craftsmen, animal handlers, and technical specialists to create what was essentially a floating city inside a movie studio. Despite this massive investment and the fact that the Bible became the highest-grossing film of 1966, earning $34.9 million at the North American box office, the production costs were so enormous that 20th Century Fox still lost $1.5 million on the project. The studio had needed the film to earn $26.9 million worldwide just to break even, but it only made $25.3 million in total rental income. This financial disappointment had devastating consequences for De Laurentiis's ambitious plans to create an entire series of biblical films covering the Old and New Testaments. He had originally announced that the Bible would be the first installment in a multi-film saga that would adapt the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation, but the unexpected loss forced him to abandon these sequels entirely, leaving this epic as a standalone project rather than the beginning of a biblical film universe. Fact 12. Dimension 150 Pioneer. The Bible made cinema history by becoming the very first film ever shot in Dimension 150, a revolutionary curved screen process that promised to immerse audiences in the biblical stories like never before, but the technology was so advanced that most movie theaters around the world couldn't actually show it properly. Dimension 150 was a variant of the 70mm Todd AO format that used an ultra-wide aspect ratio and was designed to be projected onto curved screens, creating a wraparound visual experience that would make viewers feel like they were standing in the Garden of Eden or aboard Noah's Ark. The process required special cameras, projection equipment, and theater installations that were incredibly expensive and technically complex, making it similar to today's IMAX technology in terms of the investment required from both filmmakers and theater owners. Producer Dino De Laurentiis and director John Huston believed that the grandeur of biblical stories deserved this cutting-edge treatment, and they were willing to take the risk of being the first to use this untested format for such an important project. Unfortunately, the reality of film distribution in 1966 meant that very few theaters had the necessary curved screens and specialized projection systems to show Dimension 150 films as they were intended to be seen. Many cities, including Atlanta, Georgia, had to show the Bible on regular flat screens, even though they had Cinerama theaters that could have theoretically handled the format, resulting in a compromised viewing experience for most audiences. The technology proved to be ahead of its time, and only one other major film would ever use the Dimension 150 process, Patton, in 1970, which was much more successful in securing proper theatrical presentations. The Bible's pioneering use of this format became both a testament to the ambition of its creators and a cautionary tale about adopting revolutionary technology before the infrastructure exists to support it properly. Fact 13. Nudity without doubles. Michael Parks and Ulla Bergrid broke new ground in American cinema by performing all their nude scenes in the Garden of Eden sequences without using body doubles, making The Bible one of the first mainstream Hollywood films to feature full frontal nudity from major characters. This decision was both artistically bold and practically challenging, as it required the actors to be completely comfortable with their bodies while working in front of large film crews and under the intense scrutiny that comes with portraying Adam and Eve, two of the most famous figures in human history. The nudity was filmed with careful artistic consideration, using what was described as a light and shadow style that emphasized the innocence and natural beauty of the pre-fall paradise, rather than creating anything sensational or exploitative. Director John Huston and cinematographer Giuseppe Rotuno employed strategic lighting, creative camera angles, and natural elements like trees and flowing water to create tasteful scenes that served the biblical story rather than shocking audiences for its own sake. Both actors approached these challenging scenes with remarkable professionalism, understanding that their performances would help establish how nudity could be handled respectfully in major studio productions. Parks, who played Adam, and Bergrid, who portrayed Eve, had to maintain their characters' sense of innocence and wonder while being filmed in their most vulnerable state, creating performances that felt both natural and spiritually meaningful. The inclusion of full frontal nudity was particularly daring for 1966, when the motion picture production code was still in effect, and studios were extremely cautious about content that might be considered inappropriate. The fact that this nudity appeared in a biblical epic, rather than an art house or exploitation film, helped establish new precedents for how serious filmmakers could handle mature themes while still creating content suitable for general audiences who were coming to see a religious story. Fact 14. 2-year production delay. The Bible experienced one of the longest post-production periods in Hollywood history, with filming wrapping up in December of 1964, but the completed movie not reaching theaters until September of 1966, creating an unusual 2-year gap that left audiences and industry insiders wondering what was causing the delay. This extended timeline was particularly unusual for a major studio release, as most films of that era moved from completed shooting to theatrical release within 6 to 12 months, making the Bible's lengthy shelf time a source of considerable speculation and concern. The delay wasn't due to any single catastrophic problem, but rather a combination of complex technical challenges and business decisions that kept pushing back the release date. The film's revolutionary Dimension 150 format required specialized post-production work that took much longer than anticipated, as the technical crews had to learn how to properly handle this new curved screen technology while they were working on it. Additionally, the massive scope of the production meant that editing, sound mixing, and visual effects work took far longer than originally planned. Toshiro Miyazumi's musical score also contributed to the extended timeline, as the Japanese composer needed extra time to create and record the elaborate orchestral arrangements that would eventually earn him an Academy Award nomination. The score required coordination between multiple orchestras and recording sessions in different countries, adding months to the post-production schedule. During this long delay, some industry observers began to worry that the film might never see release, or that it would arrive in theaters so late that public interest would have moved on to other projects. The extended production time also meant that some of the cast members' careers had evolved significantly between filming and release, with actors like Peter O'Toole and Richard Harris becoming even bigger stars during the waiting period, which ultimately helped rather than hurt the film's eventual marketing campaign. Fact 15. Stillborn Bible Universe. Dino De Laurentiis had envisioned the Bible as merely the opening chapter of the most ambitious film series ever attempted, with plans to adapt every single book of the Bible from Genesis all the way through Revelation, creating what would have been the ultimate religious film franchise decades before anyone had even coined the term cinematic universe. The Italian producer's original announcement promised that this first film would be followed by multiple sequels covering the stories of Moses, King David, the prophets, and eventually the life of Jesus Christ and the early Christian church, with each installment featuring major international stars and the same lavish production values. De Laurentiis had even begun preliminary discussions with several renowned directors about taking on different portions of this massive project, including Federico Fellini, Ingmar Bergman, Robert Bresson, Luchino Visconti, and Orson Welles, each of whom would have brought their unique artistic vision to different biblical stories. The plan was to create a series that would span decades of filmmaking and establish a new standard for religious epics, with each film building on the success of the previous installments. However, the financial reality of the Bible's performance killed these grand plans before they could develop any further. Despite becoming the highest-grossing film of 1966 and earning over $34 million at the box office, the production costs were so enormous that 20th Century Fox still lost $1.5 million on the project. This unexpected loss made it impossible for De Laurentiis to secure funding for any sequels, as studios became reluctant to invest in such expensive biblical productions. The failure of this ambitious series meant that audiences never got to see what could have been one of cinema's most epic undertakings, leaving the Bible as a standalone monument to both the possibilities and the financial realities of large-scale filmmaking in the 1960s.